I have like 4 companies so far in Grail's book 2 that are all manufacturers of different things, and some are more efficient than others, or they argue about it, and they have, oh, well, only this company has access to Starsteel, and only this company has access to, or they have a monopoly on the adamantine market, so there's a different kind of industrial cloak and dagger that can go there. You have gangs that support certain supply chains, and that's really cool to then think about how science is catching up while magic is meanwhile just exploding and is unpredictable and is inefficient. So I like all the things you're saying, and it just makes me kind of giddy inside, like, yeah, going the same route, and we're going to probably have similar pathways in how we decide to mechanically introduce these, and we're going to talk about it. It's going to be great.
You just made me think of a couple of things. The first thing is that with the scientification, so to speak, of magic, it reminded me of that show, I think it's called Dragon Prince or something.
Yeah.
Where humans have magic, but it's not the same as all the other magic in the world. It's like dark magic because they had to reconstruct it and sacrifice things and
they
kill.
Have to sacrifice living things in order to have magic, because they're not born with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that concept. So that really, because it gives people an edge. It gives humans an edge. Because in a world where there's elementals and dragons who will just kill you as easily as sneezing or whatever. The other thing was this idea of disbursement in a way of wild magic, and how the resource of wild magic is allocated in the corporeal beings that manifest because of them. So elementals, let's just say elementals, right? There's so many fire elementals in the world, but as those start to disappear, it's not that the magic from those guys disappears, it's that it gets concentrated more and more towards a central thing. So it could be towards one big fire elemental, or it could be that you have so many flame tongues or something, and when those break, their magic goes into wherever their source was. And that's why it becomes even more dangerous, because you've got a really big fire now.
Now, consolidating and consolidation of power is actually one of the underlying themes in book 1 of Grails right now, because you have a deity, the Warlock Patron, who's basically eating other gods right now. So you have whole clerics that are they reach for their power and it's not there, because there's a large pantheon, and Grails had already a slightly smaller pantheon than what's in the book. Some gods were kind of combined based on their ideas, but now in Grails book 1, the pantheon is shrinking, which also consolidates power. So if you have someone who is now a patron of this entity that's eating other gods, just by being mildly associated, your power is now very high. But there also might be other detriments to that influence that are there as a way to kind of tip the scales.
Yeah.
But that also means the remaining gods in their various realms also might have more power, because there's less of it spreading out. There's more available for them to draw on, which is just a fun little concept to think about, almost like a Highlander moment for the gods.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that brings up the thing again with what makes the Warlock power different from a Cleric's power, from a Sorcerer's power. The Warlocks didn't start with their power like a Sorcerer, and they didn't pray for their power like a Cleric or whatever. They didn't devote themselves. They had to forge this pact to get it. And that brings up the idea again with what happens if the patron disappears? Is the power yours or is it not anymore? And I just like that idea.
No, it is interesting because on that specific topic, before we move on, Mike Merles has said in interviews that for clerics and warlocks, when you get gifted your cleric and warlock powers, they're yours. So if you're a cleric and your god dies, you still have your cleric powers in baseline 5th edition. That's the assumption. And how much more freaking interesting is it to be able to play that connection and have that back and forth? I just remember one of the most like telling experiences I had as a DM was I had a player who was playing a Cleric Paladin multiclass who prayed to Bahamut, and she offhandedly told a goblin to go kill itself, and then it did. So Bahamut revoked her Paladin and her Cleric powers, and she was so mad. And it's like, listen, that's what happens when you play a divine character. When you take an oath of heroism and you do something not heroic, this is the consequence of that.
Yeah.
So it was just a really interesting. It taught me a lot about player expectations and being very clear up front that, you know, your powers will get taken away if you do this. And I also think I did it gradually. Like, as she was making decisions like that, I'm like, all right, you get the sense Bahamut's mad about that. You feel your power getting tugged away. And then she just kept pressing the issue. And then eventually he just revoked her powers.
Yeah.
So like that can be things like that I find as dynamic character defining moments, you know, potentially anyway.
Thank you so much for listening to some of our podcast highlights. This podcast is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network. If you want to support the content creators, feel free to visit our Patreon. And please, game responsibly.